Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to see everyone here again today. Welcome to the Section 2 EIA Online Career Workshop on the topic of 21st Century Global Employment Skill. I'm Jenny Do, Acting Manager of Partnership and Industry Engagement at EIA. And this is Rhys William. He's an Executive Manager of International Engagement at EIA. Rhys is the immediate former Director of Transnational Education at Victoria University. He has extensive experience in designing, establishing, and managing transnational education partnership in Australia University and private sector organization. So our workshop this time is a two-session program workshop to assist young student and graduate student to secure a professional job in business. And our first session has been conducted yesterday. So for those who missed our first session yesterday, you can visit our EIA website to review the first section again. And today we will be continuing the second part of the workshop, and Rhys will speak later in focusing the addressing key selection criteria. And so now I will hand over the workshop to Rhys to start. Hi, Rhys, you can start now.
Okay, thanks very much, Jenny. That's marvellous. Welcome back, everybody. I just want to very quickly recap what we did yesterday. Just let me share the screen again. Can you see that screen? You can see the screen okay? Yeah, okay. So yesterday we looked at, firstly we looked at the volatility of the workplace, that people are being trained today in primary schools, for example, for jobs that haven't yet been invented. And we looked at the thrivers in this environment, and hopefully all of you will be thrivers, have transferable skills and be capable of creating your own jobs. So we looked at then what employers are looking at, what employers are looking for today, and we've summarised them as hard skills, soft skills, digital literacy, intercultural capacity, and bilingualism. So that you've got discipline skills that are up to date, that you've got great soft skills, that you're resilient, you can show leadership, you can work in a team, that you've got digital literacy, you can use the internet and you can use IT for life and for work. And above all, that you've got an understanding of people from other cultures and backgrounds, and that hopefully you've got bilingual skills. So we looked at that in a little bit of detail yesterday. Today, what we're going to look at is the application of some of those skills. Many international students struggle today because in a global setting or in a more Western setting, they struggle because they don't have an appreciation of what are called key selection criteria. Each position in a global context will have a series of key selection criteria. Well, what on earth are these? Key selection criteria describe a position's selection requirements and standards. So firstly, the selection requirements and the standards of the position. They enable the selection team in the employer to compare candidates objectively, to facilitate transparency and evidence including for legal reasons, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. So key selection criteria, using capitals, they must be addressed in your written application, and they will form the basis of the interview questions where you make your pitch in the selection interview. As we were talking about very briefly yesterday, in a more Asian or Chinese context, people often secure a position very much through knowing somebody. And through that knowledge, often at university, being recommended for a job or for a position, and are then taken on. In a more global environment, you might be recommended for a position, but you won't be recommended to be employed. You'll be recommended to be considered for selection. And the key selection criteria enable the selection team to compare the number of candidates who have been shortlisted for the position, to compare them objectively against the criteria. So one thing to make sure that you've got in your kit bag or in your toolbox of skills is, when you're applying for a job, to make sure that both in writing in your application, you specifically address in writing each of the key selection criteria, and be prepared to be asked a series of questions in your interview based on those key selection criteria. So let's look at a couple of examples in the business field. I've picked the business field because probably the majority of you are studying a business diploma course or a business degree course. And these positions in the business field are fairly, if you like, generic, so that the key selection criteria for these positions will be fairly common across positions that you're likely to apply for, and particularly to apply for early in your career or as new graduates. So if you look at these key selection criteria, the qualifications, a minimum of a degree level qualification in a business or related discipline, a postgraduate qualification will be highly regarded. In other words, it's not compulsory, but it will be highly regarded. So somewhere in your application, you need to ensure that you have met the key selection, or you have addressed that key selection criteria in writing by saying that you possess a degree level qualification. And then, most positions will have a key selection criteria related to qualifications. That might be a diploma level qualification or a mandatory postgraduate qualification or some short courses that you need to have done, but there will be a key selection criteria around the qualification. Secondly, there will be key selection criteria covering experience and knowledge. And for this position in a business development support role, in other words, a junior role, they're asking for previous experience in business support, admin, or development, preferably in the Asian region. The position's asking for experience in implementing and coordinating business activities, and sound knowledge of business development, including costing, contracting, and what's happened to the rest of the slide, and due diligence. So these are 3 key selection criteria covering the experience and the knowledge that the employer is requiring. Essential skills and competencies: proven ability to operate in a collaborative cross-functional team environment, providing strong inputs to reach sound decisions. Strong analytical skills, excellent written and verbal communication skills, bilingual skills are highly regarded. Strong personal initiative with proven ability to execute with little supervision. So these cover the soft skills. These are the soft skills that the employer is looking for. And these are very, very much addressing the soft skills that we looked at yesterday. Good interpersonal, leadership, bilingual, analytical, problem-solving skills. These are skills that you'll need to demonstrate. And then we've got other position-related information. In this case, must be eligible to work in Australia, and the position has some interstate and overseas travel required. So these key selection criteria, the employer will produce a scoring sheet on an Excel spreadsheet with each of those key selection criteria. And then when the written applications come in, they will check those candidates who are applying, who are strong on each of those criteria. And of the 40 or 50 people who've applied, they'll narrow that down to a maximum of 4 or 5 that they will take to the next level for an interview. So if you submit an application for this role with a little covering letter and your CV, the application is likely to go into the rubbish bin. Why? It'll go into the rubbish bin because somewhere in the application, either in your covering letter or in a separate statement covering each of these selection criteria, it's not clear to the employer that you have actually met, or that you've got some experience, or you've got some evidence against these selection criteria, and your application will go into the bin. Employers will be impressed if you can, for each of these selection criteria, either in your covering letter or in that separate statement, spend a little bit of time. You don't need to spend 5 or 10 pages because that's just too much information. But very concisely, in 1 to 2 pages, if you can cover your evidence against each of those selection criteria, you've got a better chance of being selected and interviewed. Does that make sense? So the first cut of the selection will be the employer on an Excel spreadsheet measuring each of the candidates against those key selection criteria. So that's very, very important for you, a very, very useful thing to have. If English is your second language, when you're addressing these selection criteria in writing, have someone who's very good at English or someone who's a native speaker to help you edit and review your written document. So the grammar and the expression is as clear as possible. So that's key selection criteria and some examples of key selection criteria. Okay, let's have a quick look at the environment of an international setting versus a more Eastern or Chinese setting. The international setting is likely to have a flatter management structure. An Asian workplace is likely to have a more hierarchical management structure. More self-directed work as opposed to more directed or more directive work. The requirements and the duties internationally may be unclear and require negotiation, but are often written down. In a Chinese setting, the requirements and duties are often very clear, but not written down. The international workplace is certainly a lot more informal. In China or in an Asian session, workplace more formal. More two-way communication up and down. In China, more deference to authority. More direct respect for the authority of someone in a more senior position. In an international setting, a more objective approach to recruitment. So that's the importance of key selection criteria. Having a set of criteria or benchmarks or rules against which people are judged as objectively as possible. In an more Asian setting or Chinese setting, more one-way communication from top down and a more networked approach to recruitment. Rather than advertising a position, seeing who applies, encouraging people to apply, and then measuring them against a set of key selection criteria in an equal way, a situation where it's a more networked approach, where people are recommended for positions and people are folded into positions, often without an objective selection process. Using an Australian example, in Australia there is a very powerful government agency called Fair Work Australia. And Fair Work Australia, for no charge, will hear complaints from people who have not been selected for a job if they believe that they haven't been treated transparently, fairly, and with evidence. I have had to answer these complaints over the years, and Fair Work Australia contacts my organisation, and eventually it will come to me, who's chaired a selection panel, and I'll be asked to produce the evidence that the 5 applicants have been properly assessed and objectively assessed against the key selection criteria. And a document needs to be presented to Fair Work Australia to show that that's occurred. So the point of this slide, the summary for you, is to show the different cultural contexts of being selected for a position in a more international workplace setting as opposed to a more Chinese or Asian setting. And I think that you can see that key selection criteria and a more objective process of recruitment against those key selection criteria, they go together. So if you're applying for a job in a more Western or international context, that's the approach you need to follow. Which approach is better? The answer is I don't really know. And I don't think there is much evidence either way. These are cultural practices which are different in different contexts. So you students and new graduates, be aware that if you're applying for a position in an international context, this is the approach that you need to follow. Providing clear evidence against a set of key selection criteria in your written application. So moving from your application to the interview. We've gone to the next stage here, and your application is a very good one. You've demonstrated in writing against the key selection criteria that you've got some evidence there, so you're going to be interviewed. So the interview is an opportunity for you to make what I've called an authentic pitch against the key selection criteria. It's not a test or a way to trap you. Many people think that the job interview is like a test where you're going to be trapped in some way. Not the case. Most job interviews are where the employer wants you to be very articulate and give a lot of detailed information so that they can make a very good assessment of how good your skills are and your evidence is. So you need to provide comprehensive examples and evidence of your capability against the key selection criteria. So many new Chinese students are not able to provide this. So many are very, very shy. They answer questions in very, very short sentences. They don't provide the full amount of information that is an authentic pitch, a really detailed summary of who you are and why you would be good for the job. We talked a little bit yesterday that this is very difficult to do, to provide this evidence if you're a brand new graduate or indeed a student. But you can get examples from your work experience. And many of you will have had some work experience in some sort of role. Ideally, internship, volunteer roles. Most of you will have done some volunteer work. Project-based assessment. All students today do projects as part of their assessment. So in a project, what experience have you got in that project that you can use as evidence against a key selection criteria? You've all worked in teams, either on a project at work or extracurricular activities, etc. From your reading and research and from your hobbies and interests. So if you really think about it, even though you're a new graduate or still at college or university, from all of those areas there, these are all experiences that students routinely have, and you can talk about those. Don't spend a lot of time on your course results. The interview is about you, not your CV or your degree. Employers in international contexts are not really interested in whether you got distinctions for every unit or that you've got a GPA of 6 or 7. That is marvellous if you do have it, but the employer is more interested in you, your experiences, your capability, your personality, your work ethic, not just what's written in your CV and what your degree results are. It's great to have a degree. It's great to have really good results, but don't spend too much time talking about it. Talk about you and your experiences. And above all, focus on how you can add value to the organisation. If you employ me in this particular role, I will be able to add value to the organisation because I'm a self-starter, because I show leadership. I can work without supervision. I know the technical skills related to being a good accountant. In my volunteer roles and working with colleagues, other students, I've got experience in teamwork. If you approach the interview like this and talk about yourself, you will come across a lot better. So that's the suggested interview approach. Now let's again look at some examples of questions covering key selection criteria. These questions relate to the earlier position that I showed you. So under the two topics of business research and market analysis, these are the sorts of questions you'll be asked. Describe research you've undertaken. In your opinion, what are the characteristics of useful and effective business research? Describe market analysis that you've undertaken, and what criteria are most useful in market analysis. What are the characteristics of these questions? What are the characteristics of these questions? The characteristics are you're being asked to describe and demonstrate. You're being asked to give an opinion, and you're asked to evaluate. So these are not easy questions to answer, but with some practice, and I wish we had a couple of additional sessions, and we really need to do this face to face, but with some practice, you can certainly come up with really authentic and useful answers to these questions. These are further questions related to, in this case, China. Now, I want to focus a little bit on the more important and sometimes easier for some people, sometimes more difficult, related to soft skills. How effective are your workplace communication skills? Please give examples. The employer's asking you to demonstrate that you've got effective workplace communication skills and to give some examples. My workplace communication skills are quite effective. During my course, I conducted a number of projects, and I was required in those projects to work in teams, which I really enjoyed, and I needed to do presentations on the results of those projects, and my presentation skills, therefore, pretty good. That's a good way to answer that question. Demonstrate ways in which you've shown initiative. Give some examples of how you've shown initiative. I was the leader of a group of students to do a project. I was the leader of the group and I had to show initiative. I showed initiative in the following ways. I organised meetings, I summarised the meetings, I kept everybody to time, and I helped resolve conflicts. That's a good way to answer that question. And so on and so forth. Are you a problem solver? Can you give examples? Have you shown leadership in your work and studies? Well, yes, I have shown leadership, and give some examples of that. This is a very, very useful question. The next one, and one often you'll find in interviews. Please describe your strengths and your weaknesses. And how do you work on your weaknesses? So the employer's looking to see if you're mature. If you've got the ability to reflect on the areas that you're good at, the areas that you're not so good at, and how you're working on your weaknesses. Another question, very common, where would you like to be in 3 years' time? You're going for your first job or an entry-level job in the business world. Where do you want to be in 3 years' time? Do you want to be the president of China? Do you want to be the CEO of the company? Do you want to be in a different job? What are your ambitions? Where do you want to be in 3 years' time? And if you reflect, you'll be well prepared. Okay, moving on, here are some more. Another question, you're bilingual and bicultural and have a Western degree. What advantages has this given you? How will this background benefit you in your role? This question goes to the heart of your 21st century global employment skills. The other very, very common approach to job interviews is scenarios. And when you're not experienced with them, they can be a little bit frightening and a little bit intimidating. However, with some practice and with some thought, you will often find scenarios or examples, very, very good ways that you can really sell yourself to the employer as someone who would be mature, responsible, well prepared for the position. So here are the sorts of scenarios that are very common in interviews for business positions. You learn that a co-worker is talking to others behind your back, saying that you are difficult to work with. What would you do? You are working in a team undertaking a market analysis of the wine industry. You think that key sources of data are not being included by the team leader. In other words, you're not being listened to. How would you resolve it? Your boss has asked you to profile 2 companies by an email. You are unclear on the purpose of the profiles. You are unclear on what on earth sort of report is required. What would you do? The first one, a co-worker is talking behind your back, saying that you're difficult to work with. What would you do? Do you punch them on the nose? No. Do you confront them in an angry way? No. Do you confront the issue and then ask to resolve it in a sensible way? Yes, that's probably a demonstration of good, mature workplace communication skills. Your team leader is not listening to you. How do you resolve this? Do you go to your team leader's boss and complain behind their back? Probably not a good idea, probably not a good strategy. Do you confront your team leader and say, I think you're ignoring me. I think I could really add value to this report, but I'm not being included. Would you mind if I had 10 minutes with you to talk it through? Tick. Yes, that's probably a sensible way and a mature way to approach it. Your boss has sent you an email asking you to do something. You don't have a clue what your boss really wants. You don't know when it needs to be done. What do? Do you put your head under the desk and say, oh my God, I better hurry up and do something, and then you get it all wrong? Or do you go and knock on your boss's door and say, hi boss, I've got your request, but I don't know what you mean. Could you clarify it for me? And you're prepared for the discussion. How long do you want the report? When do you want it by? Do you want it in a table format or in a narrative format, etc., and so forth? Tick. Yes, that's a good answer to the scenario that shows that you've got some leadership, that you're able to go to your boss or go to your supervisor and engage as a mature professional with your employer. Okay, so I'm just going to very, very quickly summarise, and then we've got a few minutes, I think, Jenny, at the end for some questions. Key selection criteria, very, very important. They describe a position's requirements and standards, and they enable the employer to objectively assess candidates for that position in writing and verbally in an interview against those selection criteria. So you must address them. Don't just throw in an application with your CV and a covering letter. Spend some time addressing those key selection criteria. We've looked at the contexts of an international and an Eastern environment, and culturally had a little bit of a look at where key selection criteria come from. And finally, we've looked at some key selection criteria or some questions related to key selection criteria that would be commonly asked in a job interview, covering the hard skills, the soft skills, the intercultural communication skills, the digital literacy skills, all of which form, from our first session, those 21st century global employment skills. So, as I said, I wish we had a couple of face-to-face sessions where we could role play you answering these questions, recording them, and then you can review your performance. That's not possible to do, or it's very difficult to do with people on Zoom all over the place. But you're mature young people. You can take this on yourself to practice amongst yourselves against particular key selection criteria. And I've given you some very, very common questions that you can have a go at, and some very, very common scenarios that you can have a look at. And finally, again, the two websites that I refer you to. The International Education Association of Australia has got a marvellous online guide for new international graduates, Employable You. And secondly, the New Work Smarts, Thriving in the New Work Order, a really, really simple and good document with a lot of flowcharts and a lot of diagrams that shows the new workforce. So I'll stop sharing and I'll leave it there. I hope those two sessions have been useful for you in understanding a little bit more about the modern workforce, how to apply for a job, how to develop skills that'll get you for a job. And we've not had much time for practice today, but hopefully you've got the tools to do a little bit of practice into the future. So I'll conclude by wishing you all the very, very best with your studies and for applying for a job. And Jenny, I think we've got time for a few questions.
Yes. Thank you, Rhys, for the presentation. Is there anyone have questions for Rhys? Do you have any question to Rhys? Anyone?
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
Hello, don't be shy. Good.
Yes, just ask whatever you want.
Can you hear me?
Just, yes.
I have a question, dear. According to our China cultural background, maybe all students are very shy to show themselves. If this job doesn't require any leadership ability, do I still need to show up my leadership ability? Would this be very overwrought?
I didn't get that. Jenny, can you?
Yes. Can you speak louder, or can you come closer?
Come closer to the microphone. The sound's
Yes.
terrible. Sorry.
Yes.
What about now?
That's a bit better. Yes.
Better.
Okay. According to the China cultural background, I think many students is shy to show them up. If this job doesn't require my leadership ability, do I still need to show up my leadership ability to the employee? Would this be very abrupt?
I think I got most of that question. It's about your leadership skills and showing that to a particular employer. I think I got that as the question. The answer to that is yes. Leadership skills are important. And you can demonstrate as a new graduate that you've got good leadership skills through a number of ways. Working in teams on projects, extracurricular activities, hobbies, work in the community that you're doing. And in addition, if you can say a few words about what good leadership is, that will be very, very useful. Has that answered your question?
A kind of maybe. I want to know if the employee doesn't need the leadership, doesn't inquire the leadership, do I still need to show up my leadership ability?
Jenny?
I think she wants to ask if the employer doesn't require the leadership skill, and does she need to show up her leadership skill to the employer? This is what I understand.
Yeah, okay. Most job interviews will focus in some way on leadership skills or leadership capability. However, obviously be guided by the questions that you get in the interview. And if you don't get a question specifically on leadership skills, then you're not going to need to spend much time answering it. However, I always suggest to candidates for jobs that you do, particularly in an international context, show that you've got some leadership skills, and you weave in a little bit of discussion about your leadership skills in an answer to a question.
Okay, thank you. It's been very helpful.
Excellent. I'm glad. What you need now is practice, practice, practice.
Any more questions? Reese is happy to answer. Do you have any more questions?
I think the answer is no more.
Yeah, I think it's shy.
Okay, well, look, good luck with your studies, and if we've got time into the future and can be organised through Chloe, I'm very happy to do a couple of practical sessions with you guys where I'll ask you, and I'll get someone working with me to ask you some questions in a simulated job interview, some of the questions that we've had, and you can practice answering them. We'll record it, and then you can go back to the Zoom recording and see how you perform. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
right. Yeah, right suggestion, Reese. Thank you, Reese, for delivering this very useful section to the student. I believe this workshop will benefit and broaden their knowledge. And thank you, Sky, for joining the workshop. Actually, we have scheduled with more distinguished upcoming workshop by professor and industry speaker in the following week to cover more and more topic. So please follow our EIA social media platform and secure your time for all the next upcoming workshop. So, and this workshop has been recorded and we will upload to our EIA website as well. So if you miss any information, you can always go to our website to review the video again. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you have an enjoying afternoon. So we're looking forward to seeing you again in our upcoming workshop. Bye-bye and
Take care.
take care.